I remember the sound first, the shrill, sharp beeping that stabs through the sterile quiet of the hospital corridors. The sound of something failing. I was standing by the ambulance dock, logging another delivery. A man middle-aged, chest heaving. He wouldn't make it. But that wasn't my concern anymore, not officially. I brought the living or the barely breathing. What happened after that wasn't my fight. Then the alarm rang. Rapid beeping. Then flatline. Inside or two the lights stayed bright, surgical blue and white. A team was huddled around a patient, chest open, the heart under threat. In the center, Dr. Lewis, the hospital's pride, the senior cardiac surgeon, barked orders, his gloved hands deep in the cavity, until his left arm twitched once. Then again. Then he collapsed. His knees buckled like a marionette losing its strings. He slumped against the table before the surgical nurse caught his fall, scalpels clattering to the floor. Chaos snapped to life. Voices rose, conflicting orders tangled in panic. Dr. Lewis wasn't getting up. Neither was the man on the table, not without someone to finish the cut that Lewis couldn't. I was still in the hall near the doorway, the commotion spilling into the open space. No one looked at me, why would they? I was the ambulance driver. The woman you nod at when she drops off another body. I was the one who held the clipboard, waited for the nurse's signature, then walked out the same way I came in. I heard one voice shouting, "We need another surgeon." But the nearest one was across the city. 15 minutes away, maybe more. The man on the table didn't have 15 minutes. I don't remember making the decision. My body did. I pushed through the door. The smell of antiseptic slapped me awake. The surgical lights, harsh and unkind, burned down on the open chest. The heart exposed like a fragile red fruit. Nurses shouted at me to step back, but I didn't listen. I moved to Dr. Lewis first, checked his pulse. Shallow. Stroke maybe, but stable for now. Then I turned to the man on the table. I stripped off my jacket, snapping on gloves from the nearby station. The nurse stammered, trying to pull me back. "Stop. You can't. Who are you?" "My name is Maria Johnson," I said, my voice low but clear. "I'm a combat medic. Army Special Forces. 12 years. I can save this man." They froze. The instruments trembled in their hands. I could see it. The disbelief, the hesitation. And then one of the elderly doctors, his voice gravel and smoke, whispered, "I know that name." His eyes sharpened behind his bifocals. He stepped forward, squinting at me. "Kandahar. 2009. The convoy wreck. You pulled us out. I never knew your name." The nurses turned to him, then back to me. Their hands hovered, unsure. I didn't wait. I slid my hands into the man's chest cavity, the sutures half done, the artery trembling under the strain. "Clamp," I ordered. The nurse hesitated, then passed it to me. My hands moved fast. Faster than they should after years away. But the muscle memory was still there. I heard mortars in my head, the snap of gunfire, the echo of dying men calling for help. But I shut them out. Only the living mattered. I heard another voice, one of the younger surgeons on standby. "She's not certified." I didn't look up. "You can wait for your papers," I said. "Or you can help me save his life." The old doctor, the one who remembered, stepped in. He took his place opposite me, his eyes never leaving mine. "Do what she says," he ordered. "That's an order." We worked. I stitched. I clamped. I fought. And the heart, that trembling, fragile heart, began to beat steady again. I didn't know his name. I didn't need to. I just needed to bring him back. And I did. When it was over, I peeled off my gloves, my hands streaked with blood and sweat. I leaned against the wall, the world spinning around me, but the room was silent, watching. Then the old doctor spoke again. "Maria Johnson," he said. "You just saved 2 lives." I nodded once, my breath heavy. I knew what would come next, the questions, the accusations. But in that room for that moment there was only respect. The kind you can't buy. The kind you bleed for. The respect lasted as long as the blood stayed warm. By the time the patient was wheeled out, his pulse strong, the hallway had reset itself. Cold again. The nurse who'd handed me the clamp wouldn't meet my eyes. The younger surgeon stood in the corner, lips thin, arms crossed. Compliance arrived with their clipboards. "Maria Johnson," the lead officer said, his voice clean of curiosity. You are to remain on hospital property until the incident is reviewed. Do not return to your vehicle." He read the words like a script he'd rehearsed, as though he'd waited for the day someone like me, someone without the right paperwork, would slip through the cracks. "Understood," I said. I sat on the plastic chair just outside the OR, peeling away the surgical cap, my scalp damp with sweat. I could hear voices behind the glass. My name, my lack of credentials, the word liability. They didn't ask if I needed water, or if I was okay. I was a silhouette of usefulness, just long enough to be tolerated, discarded the moment the pulse monitor calmed. It wasn't the first time I'd been forgotten like that. 12 years in combat zones had taught me about the threshold between competence and legality. I wasn't a doctor. I wasn't even an EMT. Not here. Not back home. I was just Maria Johnson, 40, driver. That hadn't always been true. They didn't know that before I drove the ambulance. I flew inside helicopters over Kandahar's broken roads. That I had once cracked open a soldier's chest with a scalpel stolen from a supply tent because there was no time to wait for a field hospital. That I held arteries between my fingers while the sky lit up with tracer rounds. 143 lives. That was my count. I'd stopped adding after that. I still carried the scars, pale ropes on my side, a shattered wrist that never fully healed, a hearing loss in my left ear. But none of it translated into a license. When I got home, I applied everywhere. Civilian hospitals, emergency tech programs, anything that would recognize what I knew with my hands. The rejection letters came in neatly folded envelopes. Your experience is noted, but insufficient under state medical board requirements. Combat medicine didn't count, apparently. I settled for driving the wounded instead, picking them up, dropping them off, never crossing the threshold into a room where I might be needed again. Until today. The door beside me opened. Dr. Mitchell stepped out, wiping his hands on a towel. He looked down at me with the eyes of someone caught between admiration and pity. "They'll come for you now," he said. "HR, legal. Maybe the board." I nodded. "Let them." He hesitated, then sat beside me with a grunt. His knees popped as he did. "I remember Kandahar," he said. "I was a surgeon with the forward unit. You brought in 3 men from the convoy ambush. One of them was my resident. You carried him 5 miles on foot." I looked at the scuffed linoleum. I don't remember faces anymore. Only wounds. Mitchell chuckled softly. "That sounds about right." We sat in the quiet for a long minute. "You saved Lewis," he added. "And the patient." I shook my head. "I didn't save Lewis. I stabilized him. The stroke. He'll have a hard road back." "But he's alive," Mitchell said. "And that man on the table, he gets to see his family again. Because of you." The words didn't sit comfortably. Mitchell stood slowly. His hand rested briefly on my shoulder. "Solid. I'll speak for you," he said. "When they call you in." "Doesn't matter," I replied. "No one wants a driver with blood on her hands." He didn't argue. He just looked tired. Hours passed. Finally, they summoned me. A narrow room on the 4th floor. Conference table. 3 administrators sat with their tablets and legal pads. I stood. They sat. The woman in the center, her badge gleaming, began. "Miss Johnson, your employment role is ambulance transport. You performed surgery without a license. Do you have any defense for your actions?" I said nothing for a long moment. Then I answered the only way I knew. "In Helmand province," I said, "we didn't ask for licenses. We asked if the man was still breathing. And if he was, we fought to keep him that way." "That's not an answer," she replied. I nodded. "Maybe not. But today, a man went home to his children. And another surgeon still has a chance to walk again. So I don't regret what I did." They scribbled notes. Impassive. When they dismissed me, I went back to the ambulance bay. My rig was still there, the engine cold. No one spoke to me as I climbed into the cab. I drove home in silence, hands shaking slightly, the echo of the heart's rhythm still beating in my palms. I didn't know it then, but the board would vote within the week. And when they did, it wasn't their decision that mattered. It was Mitchell. He stood up during the hearing before a crowded room, and said 6 words that echoed louder than any certificate. I remember her in Kandahar. And that was all. It wasn't proof of legality, but it was proof of truth. And in the end, that was enough. They called me back weeks later. Not with an apology, but with a paper. A special exemption. Temporary, pending formal recognition. I could work under emergency conditions. I could save lives as if I'd ever stopped trying. I wasn't a doctor, but they finally called me what I'd been all along. A medic. A healer. A woman who remembered what it was like to pull someone back from the edge when the world had already given up. I hung the exemption on my wall, next to my old fatigues, next to the scarred scalpel I carried home from the war. Because sometimes that's all it takes to keep going, a name, a memory, and the knowledge that once in a far country I was enough. I kept driving the ambulance. That never changed. Early mornings, late nights, sirens chasing through the streets of Austin like the echoes of battles past. My partner, Danny, never asked about the hearing. He saw the new badge clipped to my vest. A laminated card with the words Emergency Medical Practitioner, Provisional. But he didn't say a word. Not until the night we parked outside the ER bay, waiting for intake to clear. "You did it, huh?" he said, watching the red lights wash over the dash. "They made it official." "Provisional," I corrected. He grinned faintly. "Still better than a thank you card." I didn't respond. I watched the hospital doors instead, the silhouettes moving behind the glass. Doctors, nurses, visitors. People with roles. With places. I had a foot in both worlds, but I didn't belong to either. 2 weeks after I received the exemption, Dr. Mitchell called. Said the hospital board wanted to see me. When I arrived, the room wasn't a courtroom this time. Just a long table, a pot of coffee gone cold, and faces I barely knew. Except for Mitchell. At the head of the table stood a woman with a sharp gray suit and sharper eyes. She gestured for me to sit. "We have a proposal," she said. I stayed standing. "We want to create a program," she continued, "for veterans like you. Combat medics, corpsmen, people trained in trauma under fire. The idea is to transition those skills into emergency medicine, properly certified, properly credentialed." She tapped her pen against her tablet. "Austin General will be the pilot program. We'll advocate for state legislation if it succeeds." "And me?" I asked. "You'll lead it." I didn't answer right away. My hands folded in front of me, still remembering the slick warmth of a human heart in my grasp. Still remembering the sound of flatline and the weight of waiting too long. "You think that'll make it right?" I asked. The woman frowned. "Make what right?" "The rejections," I said. "The years veterans come back trained to keep men alive with nothing but a belt and a prayer, and you tell them they're not qualified to do it with actual tools." She looked down. Maybe ashamed, maybe tired. "We're trying to fix that." I looked at Mitchell. He didn't say anything, but I saw it in his eyes. The same guilt, the same belief. "Fine," I said. "But I'll pick my team." Agreed. That was how it began. We started small. Flyers sent to VFW halls, American Legion posts, Marine Corps League chapters. Combat medics, Navy corpsmen, Army nurses, all of them with years in war zones, and none of them with a piece of paper that said doctor. We brought them in. We taught them the civilian protocols, the hospital policies, the language of sterile halls and CYA checklists. But I also taught them something else. Something that didn't come in textbooks. When the blood runs fast, and the light starts to leave their eyes, you don't wait. That was our creed. We became the Ghost Division. That's what the other staff started calling us, half out of respect, half out of the unease that we weren't trained the right way. But they couldn't argue with results. We walked the trauma bays, the ER floors, the recovery wards. We took the cases no one else wanted. The too far gone, the too late. The ones the surgeons looked at and whispered to each other. Not worth the risk. We took the risk. And most of the time we won. Word spread. Austin General made the news. Stories of veterans pulling civilians back from the brink. Of battle-hardened hands stitching wounds faster than protocol. Of instincts honed in places the rest of the world preferred to forget. But I didn't forget. I carried every life. Every death. Every unfinished pulse. One day I stood in the hospital cafeteria, black coffee in hand, watching the news on the muted TV. A segment ran on the Ghost Division. There was a clip of me, taken without my knowing, guiding a new recruit through a trauma drill. The caption read, "From combat to caregivers." Danny nudged me. "You're famous," he said. I shook my head. "I'm just still here." Later that night, when the city was quieter, when the ambulance hummed under me, Danny asked the question I'd been waiting for. "Why do you really do it?" That day in the OR, I stared ahead, headlights casting fleeting tunnels through the dark. "Because no one else did," I said. That was the only answer. The only truth. The hospital board gave me the program, but they didn't give me peace. That I'd have to earn elsewhere. In time I found it, not in the title, not in the exemption, but in the students. The veterans who walked into my program with scars, with tremors, with eyes that had seen more than they should. And who walked out wearing scrubs instead of camo, still fighting for lives, just without the rifles. We built something here. Something that wouldn't forget. And when I walked the halls of Austin General, I carried not just my name. I carried every name I'd ever stitched into life. Some nights, I sat alone in the break room long after the others had clocked out. The hum of vending machines filled the silence, the kind of mechanical drone that felt almost like company. There was a file I kept with me. A thick folder battered at the corners, pages soft from being thumbed through. Inside were photocopies of service records. Not mine, but of the men and women in my program. Their deployments, citations, sometimes the blurred scans of commendations or handwritten letters from COs long retired or long gone. I read them when the weight of the job pressed too heavy, to remind myself these weren't just soldiers. They were medics. They were saviors. Like Ray Del Toro, a Navy corpsman who'd performed amputations in the back of a troop carrier under mortar fire. Or Evelyn Grant, a combat medic who extracted 8 wounded from a collapsed building in Mosul, her back fractured but unnoticed until days later. Civilian boards had called their experience non-equivalent. I called it the difference between life and death. We trained at night after shifts. I taught them how to navigate the civilian systems, the paperwork, the sterilization protocols that didn't exist in dirt hospitals with plywood roofs. But I also told them what the textbooks never did. Don't let the blood fool you. When someone is bleeding, when their breath is shallow, when their eyes flicker between this world and whatever waits, that's when you speak. Not loud, not urgent. You tell them, stay here. Just stay. I learned that in Helmand, watching a boy barely 19 hold on because someone promised he wasn't alone. They stayed because we stayed. One evening, as the summer heat pressed through the walls, Dr. Mitchell found me there, the file open in front of me. He pulled up a chair, groaning with the effort. His joints didn't forgive him the way mine still did for now. You're building something, he said. I kept my eyes on the records. I'm trying. You'll need more than trying, he replied. You'll need recognition. He handed me a letter, thick, official, hospital seal embossed in gold. State Medical Board is voting on formalizing the exemption program. If it passes, it's not just provisional. You'll be licensed, not just you but everyone who follows. I stared at the envelope but didn't open it. I didn't do this for licenses, I said. I know, Mitchell replied. But if they grant this, you'll be the first. And the first has to open the door for the rest. I held the envelope like it might burn. I thought of the years I spent trying, failing, the doors that closed in my face. I thought of every man I'd carried to safety, every stitch sewn by flashlight, every heartbeat coaxed back from stillness. And I thought of the question that never left me, was it enough? Mitchell stood to leave but paused at the door. For what it's worth, he said. I trust you with my life before half the surgeons on this floor. He left me with that. I didn't open the letter that night. I didn't need to, because by then I knew my worth wasn't in a piece of paper. It was in the hands I taught, the lives we saved, the moments where someone looked into the dark and found me still standing there, unlicensed but unyielding. The board voted a month later. The exemption became law, at least here in Texas. Other states watched, debated, but for now the door was open. My license arrived by courier. A sterile thing, laminated, official. My name in clean serif font. Maria Johnson, certified emergency practitioner. I tacked it to the wall beside my old military commendations, the medal still boxed, never displayed. Next to it, I hung a different relic. A patch torn from my old combat uniform, the edges frayed but the stitching still firm. Medic, no one dies today. Some weeks later, I walked the ER again, checking in on my trainees. The air smelled of disinfectant and coffee, the timeless signature of every hospital. At the far end of the hall, I saw Ray and Evelyn prepping a trauma room. Car accident, I heard, bad one. The incoming patient wasn't going to wait for bureaucracy. I stood by the door as they worked, silent, watching. Ray looked up once, caught my eye and nodded. Not thanks. Not deference. Just a recognition. We don't forget who brought us back. Outside, the Texas heat pressed down, heavy as a loaded rucksack. I stood by the ambulance, hands in pockets, eyes on the sky. Once I thought coming home would be the end of the fight. But the fight had just changed faces. Less dust and blood, more policy and papers. But the stakes were the same. Life or death. And I was still in it. I drove home that night, the city lights flickering past like distant flares. At home, I placed the license on the shelf but sat instead with the scalpel from Hellman, the steel dulled but intact. It wasn't a relic. It was a reminder of who I was and who I still chose to be. A medic, no matter what anyone called me. A year passed. Austin General's program didn't just survive. It expanded. The board formalized the Veteran Transition Medical Program. We trained former combat medics, corpsmen, field surgeons, veterans who had carried bodies, restarted hearts, sewn men together with nothing but field kits and force of will. The media came sometimes, looking for a story that sanitized us, that called us heroes with that thin sugary sheen. I let them talk, but I didn't perform for the cameras, because in the trauma bay, no one cared about a headline. Only the blood on the floor, the trembling rhythm of someone deciding whether to stay alive. The program drew in men and women who'd been left behind by a system that called them heroes overseas but ghosts back home. We brought them back to life too. One of the first I recruited was Thomas Reyes, Navy. He'd been a corpsman with the Marines, had the 1,000-yard stare of a man who'd seen friends die badly. He worked construction for 5 years after discharge, barely spoke to anyone. When he heard about the program, he came in person, didn't call, didn't write, just showed up. I heard you don't ask for resumes, he said. Only scars, I replied. He nodded. I've got those. Reyes became one of the best trauma techs we had. I watched him one night bring a gunshot victim back from cardiac arrest with the same steady hands he once used pulling Marines out of alleyways in Fallujah. He didn't need to say much. His work said enough. We built a kind of quiet pride among ourselves. No uniforms, but we knew each other. The veterans walked differently. Alert, steady, respectful of the dead but anchored to the living. We trained together, ate together, drank when the nights got too heavy. We didn't call it a family. That word hurt too much for some of us, too many ghosts in that term. We called it the line. Because when things got bad, when the lights flashed red and someone's life dangled, we held the line. That's all. One evening, the hospital's administrator, a man named Green, visited our training room. He wore the usual crisp suit, the look of a man used to decisions, not deployments. I want to understand your methods, he said. I didn't answer right away. I let him watch us drill on a mock trauma scenario: massive bleed, compromised airway, cardiac shock. Reyes called orders like a combat zone, Evelyn prepped the airway, and 2 newer recruits locked in 4 line. They worked without shouting, without chaos. Swift, silent efficiency. Green scribbled notes, his eyes narrowed. After, he asked, "Why no verbal confirmations like in standard protocols?" "Because," I said, "in war shouting gets you killed. In trauma shouting wastes time. We watch each other. We move when it's time. That's the method." He frowned. "Not by the book." I smiled faintly. "But alive." He didn't argue. Then came the day everything changed. A pileup on the interstate, 3 cars crushed, 12 injured, 3 critical. The call came just past midnight. We rolled out 4 rigs, the Ghost Division. Reyes drove lead, Evelyn in the 2nd unit, me behind them. The wreckage looked like a war zone. Steel twisted, glass shattered like ice on asphalt. Blood and gasoline in the air. We worked by headlamp and headlights. I found a girl trapped between 2 frames of metal, her leg pinned, bleeding out. She was maybe 20, face pale, her eyes wild with fear. "I can't breathe," she whispered. I knelt, brushed the hair from her forehead. "Stay with me." I made the call: crush amputation. No time to free her leg. The metal was collapsing. I pulled the emergency kit, the bone saw, the tourniquet. Evelyn slid in beside me. Need a hand? No. I need you to count. She nodded, pressed her watch. I told the girl, you'll wake up. You'll still be here. You'll hate me for this. But you'll live. She cried, but she nodded. I cut. The blade bit, the sound wet and terrible. Evelyn counted aloud, not fast, not slow. Just steady so I didn't lose the rhythm. When the leg came free, we hauled her out. Blood poured, but the tourniquet held. She coded in the rig twice. Reyes and I brought her back both times. She made it. Later, after we'd cleaned the blood from the gurneys, I sat outside the hospital in the quiet pre-dawn dark. My hands still trembled, not from fear, but from the echo of what it means to hold someone's life literally between your fingers. Reyes sat beside me, offered a flask. I shook my head. Not yet. He sipped and said, You did it again. What? Made sure someone wakes up angry enough to curse you. That's how we know it worked. I laughed just once. Yeah, that's the job. We sat in silence a long time. Then Reyes said, They should have made you a doctor. I shook my head. No, I'm a medic. That's older than doctor. Older than surgeon. I'm the one who keeps the heart beating long enough to reach a doctor. Still, he said, if I'm ever bleeding out, I want you, not them. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. We watched the sun rise, slow and gold over Austin, the light creeping over the edges of a city that still didn't know what to call us. Heroes, vets, medics, ghosts, didn't matter. We knew who we were. We were the line. And no one died today. Weeks after the pileup, a letter arrived at my office, heavy cardstock, hospital seal. I opened it without much thought. Inside was an invitation. The state medical board was hosting an event. They were honoring medical innovation, and for reasons I didn't quite understand, they'd chosen me as a keynote speaker. I almost threw it away. Public speaking wasn't in my blood. I wasn't trained to talk to crowds, only to bodies torn apart. But Mitchell heard about it and cornered me in the hallway. You need to go, he said. Why? Because they'll listen to you. And because the veterans in your program, they deserve to be seen. I sat on it for a day. Then another. Finally, I agreed. The auditorium was colder than I expected. Rows of gray chairs, faces blurred into a gallery of eyes waiting for wisdom. I wore a plain suit. No medals, no insignia. Just me. The moderator introduced me with a list of credentials I never earned. They stumbled over what to call me. Former Army combat medic, current emergency practitioner, leader of the Veterans Medical Transition Program. I stepped to the podium. The lights burned down. I didn't prepare a speech. I didn't write down notes. I just told them the truth. I was trained to keep men alive under fire. In places with no hospitals, no guarantees. In my hands, I've held arteries pinched shut, lungs punctured by shrapnel, hearts beating slower than a clock winding down. I looked across the room. I applied to hospitals when I came home. I was told it wasn't enough. That saving lives in war wasn't the same as saving them here. I paused. Until the day your surgeon collapsed in his own oar. And the only hands steady enough to keep two people alive were mine. Silence. I let it hang there, heavy. Since then, we've built a program here. Veterans, men and women you left behind in your credentialing systems. We brought them back. We trained them to work within your rules. But make no mistake, they already knew how to keep people alive. I leaned in. I don't want a medal. I want a pipeline. I want every combat medic who comes home to have a path to the ER, the trauma bay, the surgery floor. No more wasted lives, not in war, not here. I stepped back. They applauded, polite, but I didn't wait. I left the podium and walked straight out into the hallway, where the air didn't taste like obligation. Mitchell caught up to me outside. That was good, he said. It was necessary, I replied. He smiled, tired but proud. I hope it changes something. So do I said. But even if it doesn't, we'll still be here. When the next siren calls. Change came slowly, but it came. Legislation passed that year. A formal credentialing program for combat medics, corpsmen, and military nurses. A partnership with hospitals statewide. Austin General became the first hospital in Texas to have a dedicated veteran staff trauma team. We called ourselves unofficially the Last Watch, because when no one else could stop the bleeding, we'd still be there. One day, a man stopped me in the hospital lobby. A stranger, civilian clothes, kind eyes. "You're Maria Johnson?" he asked. I nodded. "You saved my brother," he said. "In that pileup." He was the one with the crushed chest. I remembered. Reyes and I had cracked his chest open on the highway shoulder, massaged his heart barehanded. "He made it?" I asked. "He's walking again. He has a daughter on the way." I stood still, unsure what to say. He extended his hand. "Thank you," he said simply. I shook his hand, felt the tremor in my fingers. Some part of me still expected the weight of a scalpel, a clamp, a tourniquet. But not that. Not gratitude. Later that night, I stood in the training room with my people. Reyes, Evelyn, the newer recruits, the ones with fresh scars and eyes still haunted. I told them what the man said. They didn't cheer. They didn't clap. They just nodded like I had told them the weather, or a truth we already knew. We didn't do this for thanks. We did it because no one else could. Because when the lights flickered, the monitors screamed, the blood poured, we stayed. They gave me a plaque once, to commemorate the program's success. I left it on my desk, gathering dust. What mattered more was the message etched into the doorframe of our training room. Reyes had carved it with a pocket knife, the letters crude but sharp. "When the world runs out of time, we remain." And we did. We always would. Because that was our creed. No one dies alone. Not on our watch. Years from that day, when the memories had softened but never faded, I still drove sometimes. Not because I had to, but because the wheel, the road, the sound of the siren, it kept me close to who I was. They asked me once at some conference, some polished event where they'd finally learned to pronounce my name right, "What makes a medic different from a doctor?" I answered without thinking. A doctor learns to save lives because that's the goal. A medic learns to save lives because if we don't, there's no one else. That's the difference. On my wall, alongside the fading patches, I kept a photograph. Not of the war, not of the hospital. It was a picture of the first group of graduates from the program. Veterans in scrubs, some smiling, some not, all standing together in the cold light of the hospital's rear entrance. It wasn't a glamorous shot, but it was honest. Above it, I'd written a simple line, the words I taught every trainee, every medic who passed through. "We stay. Until the last breath. Until the light returns. Or the silence comes. We stay." That was all we were ever asked to do. And that was all we ever needed to remember.